From News Channel 7, this is Breaking News.
Special news conference getting underway at this hour in Marianna at the Office of State Attorney Steve Meadows concerning the tragedy up there yesterday in Marianna involving the Jackson County Sheriff's wife and a deputy and 2 other men. Let's go live and join the news conference already in progress.
Responded. Closely behind him were the sheriff and 2 other units from the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. Whenever the sheriff arrived, he found an individual indicated as Lionel J. Sands. Mr. Sands was 60 years of age. He's a retired Army officer. He was a resident here in Jackson County. These individuals and the second individual was a Daniel Ray Brown, a 54-year-old white male as well, who was at times residing in Jackson County and at times residing in Louisiana and Texas and other parts of the country. These individuals began to open fire on the sheriff and the other deputies that responded. The gunfire was returned. These 2 individuals, Lionel J. Sands and Daniel Ray Brown, were killed. After they were killed, the first deputy was located and the sheriff's wife were located. Both had been shot and killed there near the entrance to the home. All of this occurred, this tragic series of events, from the time of the first initial scream until the time that the individuals responsible for these horrible acts were killed, occurred within a 7-minute time frame. Inside the car that belonged to Lionel J. Sands and on the person of Lionel J. Sands was found latex gloves, bleach, gallons of vinegar, police-type handcuffs, 3 sets, package of flexible police-type handcuffs, the disposable type, duct tape, trash bags, a great amount of ammunition. On Mr. Sands was found 2 .38 caliber pistols. Also armed were Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown was armed with a .22 caliber pistol as well. There have been a number of questions as to the motive. What I can tell you is that Mr. Sands had been and was continuing to be, up until the time that he was killed, a suspect in the death of his wife that occurred in 2001. Her death occurred June 9, 2001. At the time of her death, she was found floating in a swimming pool of the home that was owned by Mr. Sands. Autopsy revealed that she had had some blunt force trauma to the back of her head. The only 2 witnesses to how the death occurred were Mr. Sands and Mr. Brown, who indicated that she was found that way in the pool, and a ladder was tipped over, and the suggestion was she had fallen off a ladder, hit her head, and drowned in the pool. That case was under active investigation by the Jackson County Sheriff's Department up until the time of Mr. Sands' death. What's also important is that there was civil litigation that was also taking place between Mr. Sands and the insurance companies that insured the life of his wife. This litigation had come to the point where within the past few days, Mr. Sands had his case dismissed from federal court and was being held responsible for costs that the plaintiffs or the defendants in the case, the insurance company, had incurred defending the lawsuit. That occurred within the last few days preceding the tragic events that occurred yesterday. The actions of the responding officers of the Jackson County Sheriff's Department were heroic. Had it not been for the quick actions of these officers, both of these individuals may have fled the area and been unable to identify. They took great steps to camouflage not only themselves, but the vehicle they were in had a license plate that was from another state that had been taken off a vehicle in another state. Mr. Sands was wearing disguise, a wig and a glued-on mustache. Mr. Brown was wearing a suit with a hat and glasses. There were indications that makeup was worn by the individuals. So there were great steps to conceal their identity, to conceal their mode of transportation, to allow them to flee from the commission of this crime. Thankfully, because of the quick action of the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, these individuals were met with the force that was appropriate based upon their conduct. I think these individuals are heroes for the actions they took, the bravery and valor they demonstrated at Sheriff McDaniel's home. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, do you think that they were, what do you think that the two men were going to do with all that equipment they had with them? Do you think they were going to try to bring her in the house and wait for the sheriff to come? What's your thoughts on that?
I would have to speculate to tell you. All I can tell you is they came prepared to restrain more than one individual. They came prepared to conceal evidence of a crime. That's typically what you would bring bleach and vinegar and wear latex gloves for. So what their ultimate plan was died with Mr. Sands and Mr. Brown. But clearly they were up to a vicious plan that was unfortunately not stopped until two wonderful individuals had been taken from this community.
Did the sheriff testify against Mr. Sands at the civil trial?
There was not a civil trial.
The case was dismissed before any testimony.
That's correct.
And was Mr. Sands in fact under indictment or just facing indictment?
Mr. Sands was under investigation.
Were threats made prior against Sheriff McDaniel and his wife prior to this incident?
We have no indication that any threats were made against Sheriff McDaniel or his wife by these individuals prior to this occurring.
Mr. Sands and Mr. Brown meet, and what was Mr. Sands' rank in the military?
Well, there's some conflict about that. Some records indicate that found within his home that he may have been a lieutenant colonel in the Army. There's some indication that he may have only been a captain. So those records, of course, we can't get those overnight from the Department of Army, but we'll be looking into that.
Where did he serve? You know where he served? His
No,
retired or anything?
I can't tell you where he
And how did these
served.
two meet?
The information we have is that they actually met at in a prayer group in a church.
How many times was
Here in this area? A prayer group in this area in church?
That's correct.
How many times
You know
was
what
the
church?
sheriff's wife
Could you
shot?
give us the name of the church? Could you give us the name of the church?
I could not give you the name of the
Is it
church.
this county though? Is it this county?
That's the
Can you show us
information.
again
I have.
which was Mr. Sands and which from the digital pictures?
Where are the photographs?
Can you tell us how many times the sheriff's wife was shot?
What I can say, I really don't want to go into though they have just today been examined by the medical examiner. There are no ballistic results yet, so it's all premature for me to go into the nature of the wounds.
Can you tell us where she was shot?
No, I'd rather not.
Mr. Meadows, help us out. Was she shot in crossfire, or does it appear she was executed before
No,
the sheriff got to
no,
help her?
she was on the ground, and the deputy was on the ground prior to the arrival of Sheriff McDaniel and prior to the arrival of the other two deputies that
Was the deputy
responded.
wearing a bulletproof vest at the time? How did he told his son when he came fire with those two?
This is Mr. Brown. This is Mr. Sands.
What is the direct link between Mr. Brown and just in the church group, or was Mr. Brown just tagging along, helping out Mr. Sands?
I'd have to speculate to answer your question. All I can tell you is the information we have is they met at a church group. They had been associates for some time since then.
But they were both in the military?
I didn't say that Mr. Brown was in the military.
Why was Mr. Sands never charged?
Well, that is under investigation. Why he was never charged was a question about the quantum of evidence we have to prove that in fact he inflicted the blow to the back of his wife, as opposed to her falling off the ladder and hitting her head on the pool deck and being, and falling into the pool. That was the question. And the two witnesses that we had there, Mr. Sands and Mr. Brown, indicated that she was just found in the pool in that condition.
Just to
Is that
clarify,
the case, is there any other prior record for both individuals?
There is a prior prison period of incarceration on Mr. Brown. He served 8 years in the Texas Department of Corrections on an assault charge, was paroled, I believe, in '95.
Is there
How
any
many
indication
shots
that
were exchanged?
Mrs. McDaniel was serving as a victim's advocate for a female acquaintance of Mr. Sands?
Not that I'm aware of.
Do you know how many shots were exchanged?
Well, we know how many shell casings were recovered. We're not prepared to release that information at this time.
just to clarify, do you believe the two were shot before the other units arrived, before the other, or was that they saw them arrive and then they shot the two?
What I can tell you is that at the time that Sheriff McDaniel arrived on the scene, Miss Mellie McDaniel and Deputy Harold Michael Altman were dead on the ground at his home.
Last night you had over 100 officers out searching after this was over from 4 different counties, including the Bay County SWAT team and K-9 units and all. Was there any indication there were more people involved? And if there were, what happened with that?
What I can tell you is that was done as a precautionary measure because there was a third individual that was known to associate with these two individuals that we now know committed these horrible crimes. But during the course of the night, we have been able to rule out that individual as he was in another state at the time, and we have been able to establish that to show that at this point there's no reason to think that he had any involvement.
Mr.
So there was
I know it's
no
only
evidence
speculation
that
at
he
this
was
point,
there
because
last night? Or that anyone else was there? There was no evidence to support that? It was just a precautionary measure?
At the time that the search was begun, and at the time the search was conducted, we didn't know how many individuals may have been involved in this shooting. Okay. All we knew is that we had two shooters that had been confronted by Sheriff McDaniel and his deputies.
Who appears to be the target, as far as you can, I know it's speculation because it died with the bad guys, but who appears to be the target? Mrs. McDaniel or Sheriff McDaniel? Or both?
Your speculation is as good as my speculation. I've given you the facts. These people arrived with this equipment at the home of Sheriff McDaniel and followed his wife down the driveway to her home. Were they waiting for the sheriff? Did they just intend on taking Miss McDaniel? All the answers to those questions died with the individuals that were confronted by the deputies that day.
So she got out of the car, as did they, but she never got to the house, or where exactly did it all?
The driver's side passenger window of her car was shot out, but she was found in front of the car and in front of the doorway to her home.
You believe she was pulled out of the car and then shot down?
Again, the only witnesses to that event are not with us anymore.
Pardon me, you said the driver's side passenger window? Was
No.
that the back window?
The driver's side window.
The driver's window.
The driver's window.
How is the sheriff doing now?
Well, the sheriff, as you would anticipate, is dealing with an incredible loss. Not only has he lost his wife, but this is a close-knit community. And a deputy sheriff within that department is a member of your family. And so there are two members of his family that have now lost their lives due to the decisions that Mr. Sands and Mr. Brown made that day.